Hello, everyone, and welcome to our podcast on the band project that we've been working on for the last few weeks. I'm Richie, and I was practicing the bass.
I'm
I'm
Calvin, and I was doing guitar.
I'm Alex, and I was also doing the guitar.
I'm Andrew, and I'm doing piano and vocals.
And I'm Kevin, and I was doing the drums.
So, we've all had our problems and our things that we've had to work through in this project, and I think that's one of the things that we want to talk about today in the podcast.
Absolutely. But first of all, we want to go through the three Vision the Graduate capacities that we worked on throughout the course of this project, and that we thought about as we were learning. And so the first one that we decided to write about and to talk about today is to pursue unique interests, passions, and curiosities. So obviously, this has a big impact on the project because the whole project was pursuing a unique interest that we all have, and so we all got to explore our own different instruments and things we were interested in, and which we don't usually get to do. So if everyone wants to kind of go through and talk about why they chose their instrument, they can do that.
Well, I chose the bass because I've always been interested in how it sounds and how it kind of raises up the music around it and kind of supports it. And I think that it's interesting how it works in trying to learn something like that. And I'm not very good with any instruments or reading sheet, and I think trying something new like that was an interesting opportunity for me.
For me, the drums was something that like my parents had explored. Like my dad used to play the drums a lot when he was in a teenager, and I had tried the drums when I was a kid for a little bit, and I always kind of wanted to have the chance to get back into it, but never really like being able to push myself to get back into playing the drums. And I wanted to take this as an opportunity to try it again and like really renew that passion for being able to play drums. It's something like that I've always liked. I'm very good with like keeping melodies and things like that. So I feel like I chose the drums so I could renew my passion. I just because it's a very interesting instrument to me.
Yeah, I have a very similar passion to Kevin. I used to play the piano when I was pretty young, and I stopped around the age of like 14, and I didn't do too much, like, especially in a band format, but it's just like reigniting the passion for playing the piano and also doing the vocals as well, which I have been uh, participating in for the past couple of years.
Yeah, and I decided to go with the guitar because I've always been really interested in the guitar, and just it kind of comes up in almost every genre of music, and it has a really central sound to all these different kinds of music. So I thought it'd be really interesting to try to learn how to play it, and just to learn music theory and kind of what goes into making things sound good and all the mechanics behind that. And I definitely got to do that through this project.
Right. At its core for this project, it's mainly focused on music theory and how we can kind of simplify the music that we're learning. And that's something that I've kind of been interested in for a while and that I've looked at in my free time, but I never actually had the time or dedication to put it towards learning with an actual instrument. And I
Yeah, I mean,
think this gave us that opportunity.
yeah, definitely. And also, I want to touch upon why I wanted to do the electric guitar. Um, I've always loved like how an electric guitar sounds, like the vibrations it can make. It's just like it's. I've always been interested in it, and I've never gotten myself to actually try it because I know it's really difficult. But now that I've like started, it's like I love it so much. It's nice. So yeah, that's why I wanted to do it.
And I think a lot of us can say that for our instruments. After we've started to pick up on it, we really liked the sounds that we were kind of learning and the things that we were doing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think another thing that we touched upon music theory, and that especially was true for me because I read the book I read was called "This Is Your Brain on Music," and it's a very interesting and informative book that talks about how music impacts the brain. And it's written in kind of very unique style because the author was a music and rock enthusiast, and he like became a neuroscientist, and so he writes his stuff from the perspective of someone who used to be like a musician, but then became a scientist. So he has a very interesting take on it, and it makes the book very readable because he talks about his own experience and stuff like that. And it's a lot more informal than I expected, and it's still informative, but it's much more entertaining than I was expecting. And I enjoyed reading it. I'm not quite finished with it yet, but I read a good chunk of it. And the author is he's able to convey a lot of thought provoking things and cool information in his informal style, and I really enjoy that kind of stuff. And I learned a lot from the book also.
Okay, moving on to the next Vision of the Graduate idea. It's collaborating with others and producing a unified work and heightened understanding. And I think that our group kind of excelled in this due to just its size and having to work together and communicate. And since we're all friends in the first place, that kind of helped us out.
Yeah. Alex, do you want to talk about us splitting up the guitar parts?
Yeah, so basically when we first chose Back in Black, we realized that the guitar it's separated into two. There's a main guitar and a secondary guitar. And for one person, yeah, and the bass. But like the guitar, like throughout the whole thing, it's impossible for one person to play, especially given the time frame that we have. So we decided to split the parts into two. We're not exactly sticking to what the main guitarist plays and the second one plays, but we just picked and choose what we wanted to play.
Right.
Yeah,
I think
we split it up according to how long it would take to learn each one approximately. So we split up like the solos so that we would play even amounts of each part.
I think that
Right.
picking and deciding on which parts would be the simplest is one of the most interesting parts of our project. And I was talking about that before with how simplifying the core music and making it so we can play it in the time frame that we have and considering our skill level was one of the most challenging parts of the project. And I think that was one of the things that being in such a large group helped us overcome.
Yeah, I think Richie's point sort of relates to having to play the piano for Back in Black, because there is no real piano part, so I had to go in and look for a piano like guide to that someone had already made, and I'm gonna make chords based off of that guide that would overlay on everyone else's parts.
Yeah, adapting our play style to like fit, like changing it in order to fit in time frame is something that we like all have to do. Like for example, I have to add new fillers in, like along with the bass beat, which is like a simple drum pattern. I have to add fillers in to make it so to fill in the empty space that is caused when in between the beat patterns because of how the new guitars are played. So like overall, like just creating this like project in this time frame, like modifying it this way, like really it helps us show like how proficient we are in this capacity. And like I think this capacity more than the other two is kind of like the main capacity.
Right.
Yeah, and that definitely ties into the critically interpret, evaluate, and synthesize information capacity, which is our third one. And so that definitely applies to like having to modify the music and come up with specific parts to play, like Kevin and Andrew both had to do, and me and Alex splitting up the music and stuff like that. So we all kind of had to do our own modifications, and come up with different things, and kind of so we used a lot of the information that we had learned from all our experience to come up with our own way of playing the song that would work for all of us.
Right. And I think that one of the things that was hardest for us to like synthesize was the sheet music and like how to take in and be able to learn and practice the notes that we had to play. And I know a couple of us found out about tab music, which is similar to sheet in the way that it's kind of read off of like the different notes that you play off of like a bar list, but it's a bit more simplified and easier to understand. So instead of going out of my way to learn the entirety of sheet, I just went through and figured out how to do tab, which was a lot simpler for me.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
can say the tabs are very simple because the alignment of my fingers, it shows you the alignment of where my fingers are supposed to be on the guitar and which frets to be in. So that was really helpful for me visually instead of looking at the sheets.
yep, I had the same experience, and I think when you're first learning, tabs are really useful to figure out. So you don't have to each time you look at a note go back and like look up what exact frets to play and stuff like that. All right, so I think what else we should? Oh, so we should talk about what we learned about ourselves as learners, like metacognition during this experience, and I definitely found out a lot of interesting things about how I learn. And so some of those things included like um, music. I actually felt like I learned a lot faster than other things. And I think that's largely due to the fact that you get immediate feedback when you're learning music. And um, I think that definitely helps me because as soon as you play a wrong note, you know it's off immediately, and when you play a correct note, you immediately know that it's working.
Right.
Yeah.
And
I found a very similar experience where you get
yeah,
this instant gratification, and I learned it a lot faster than I'd expected to because of that.
yeah,
Yeah, I agree. I had the same kind of thing. Like if I'd be practicing the drum pattern beat, and I'd notice like if something doesn't fit here, if I would hit it too early, like I would be able to instantly be able to look back and tell what was wrong. So like kind of like the trial and error sort of type of learning is kind of what like it seems to work for me best for at least this type of music.
Yeah, and
yep,
in general, I want to touch upon something like correctional learning is something that's very important in our learning and how we learn. And one of the ways, like through this experience, I learned how effective correctional learning can be. And not to go kind of on a tangent, but I'm kind of going to. But this kind of relates to my science research projects where I'm seeing how different exercises affect my strength on a certain exercise. So um, I'm going to see how a front squat affects my back squat, and this is how makes sense because when you're doing the front squat and it's in an anterior position, um, you're forced to kind of go forward, and to correct that, you have to strengthen your upper back, and that translates directly to your back squat. So you'll be cognizant of what that you've corrected yourself, so you know what it feels like. So that's the same thing with learning guitar. As soon as I played the wrong chord, I knew that was wrong, and I corrected it immediately, and that's how I think I learn most efficiently. And I think
yeah,
it goes to say like that's how we should learn because that's how our nervous systems learn.
Right. I think having this instant, very noticeable feedback is a good way for people to learn. And it's very consistent that people will learn better and faster in this way. So
yep.
having a strategy that'll keep us focused and having better feedback on time would be better for us as students.
Yeah, and that was definitely mentioned in the book that I read, and so he talks about kind of exactly what we've been talking about, how instant feedback makes it a lot easier to learn things and makes it a lot more natural to get better at things. So, does anyone else want to talk about the book that they read individually and how that kind of contributed to the capacity to interpret, evaluate, and synthesize information?
Well, the book that I read kind of talked about how jazz evolved through the. And I know we're not doing a jazz song, but I think that the jazz had a big effect on the songs that we were learning today, and it kind of was what developed the bass, and that was what my book was about. So, the chord developments of the bass and how it kind of backed up the music talked a lot about like how it changed form. Like it went from a straight like standing bass where you played it and it was really big, like cello sized, to like a guitar, and it kind of developed as a and stood out more as an instrument, and you could see that echoed in the songs that we're learning for our project.
Yep.
Anyone else?
Okay. So we also. Oh, also, do we want to talk about how each person learned their instrument? So we talked a little bit about tab music online and how that worked. But how did each person learn how to do the specific physical things to actually play the songs?
Oh,
Well,
for me, I started off with the drum pads, which is like I had like just basically pads. I didn't have like the actual drum set. And I just positioned them, and I positioned like the positions they would be in an actual drum set. And I just practiced the rhythm. I guess like for me, like the most important part, like is I don't actually have to play it. I just have to get the rhythm down and like get the like memorize the patterns, because then I can just transfer that over into a real drum set. And then after a while, I brought down like the pieces of the drum set I needed, because I couldn't fit the entire drum set. So I'd bring down the hi hat, the cymbal, the snare drum, the bass, and then the extra drum, and I just have that, and I'd use or take that pattern I repeated, and I'd play that on the drum set, and then I'd look for any places where I could put in fillers, and I'd try to make these
Exactly.
like fillers to make it sound like more filling, or like sound more full, instead of like having like playing my pattern and then have like little spaces in between that. So I think my drumming experience, my like learning how to play the drums is different from like a note sheet or anything like that, because it was just kind of about learning the patterns by like practicing it out instead of reading it. Of course, I did watch the YouTube videos, and I did look up like things, guides to help me. But I tried like stay and create my own like fillings to make it like more of my original own work.
when I was learning, for me, when I was learning my bass chords, I originally didn't have a bass, and I was looking around to get one from different people because I didn't want to go to a store and buy one. And even though I eventually found one, I had to practice it on the guitar at first. So it was very hard for me to get that instant feedback that we were talking about at first, and it was hard to recognize what it was supposed to sound like. So once I switched over to the bass, I immediately noticed the difference of how it sounded and how I responded to that, and noticed when it sounded off.
Yeah, that must
For
have been
me, it
hard.
was a for me it was a little bit for for me it was a little bit of a similar process to Kevin, except for the fact I looked at videos online because there is no actual piano part. So I found an adaptation of the song through piano, and I just kept on listening to it and practicing it and like adding my own like type of chords. And then for the vocal part, it's just a matter of me continuously listening to the actual song and trying to recreate Brian Johnson's voice, which is still going to be like a bit difficult.
Yeah, so in the way I learned is similar to Kevin's. How um I practiced the individual chords and I made sure I got the chords right, and that so I would have to play each string individually to see if the chords are correct. And no matter how slow I played, I would always just try to get that sequence of chords instead of making it sound like the real song by playing it faster. And as I did that, I eventually was able to play faster. And that's a very efficient way to learn music, among other things.
Yep. And the way that I kind of learned the physical aspect of playing the guitar was just from online videos, and I kind of started off just by learning general chords and stuff, and then moved into the specific song. And I initially did look up some videos and tutorials on how to actually play the chords and do the rest of the song. I eventually just ended up doing the tabs, because once I learned how to play it the first time, I just kind of needed to read the tab to remember what I needed to play for each part. So for the majority of the time, I was just reading the tab and kind of practicing over and over again, and until I got it right. Um, so I
Let's
guess
go.
the last thing we can talk about is, or another thing we can talk about is how what the stuff we learned about ourselves as learners can apply to future challenges, and how we'll use it to change our school experiences in the future.
Like I had said earlier, I think that the way of learning that we all talked about, and how having this instant feedback kind of gratifies us into learning faster and more efficiently. That would help me out a lot for my studies and things that I want to pick up on faster. Because if you dedicate more time to it and you kind of figure out patterns and how it's supposed to feel to get things right, you'll know what it feels like to get things wrong. And that's something that you can apply to almost everything that you learn.
Yeah, like just getting immediate feedback is really important. So sometimes in the past, I've done stuff where I'll like do my math homework and then check my answers in class or something, but it's much more effective to do them and then immediately check the answer to see if you did it right. And then if you did it wrong, you can immediately go back and fix it. And that's a lot better at correcting the problems you have in your thinking than doing it and then correcting it like 12 hours later when you've kind of forgotten your thought process.
I think the group aspect of this project also helps us like get like a heightened understanding and being able to evaluate like what we're doing more easily because we have 5 people in the group all playing different instruments. We all have to be able to like practice on our own and then come back together and make something that doesn't sound awful.
Yep.
Right.
All right.
Do you want to go into the challenges we faced?
Okay.
All right.
I think one of the main challenges, definitely me and Calvin faced in playing the guitar, is your finger sensitivity. If you don't play the guitar regularly, is pretty weak. It's pretty high. So like you don't have calloused fingers, and when you start, it just destroyed my fingers. And it took me a very long time of like figuring how much time I can play without it like hurting my fingers. And then each day I would progressively add more time to my sessions. So that was definitely a struggle for me, like painful. I couldn't pick anything up for like a few days when I first started.
Yeah, I had the same problem.
Yeah, me too. Because when you're pushing down with the tips of your fingers, you have to push it down a lot more forcefully than you'd expect and with like the right amount of emphasis. And I think that doing that for a while and you have these huge dent marks on your fingers afterwards, it's kind of difficult to get through.
Yeah, especially because my strings are warped on my guitar because it was left in the basement, a humid basement, so it warped the strings. So the strings are much higher than the frets. So that means I have to push like 3 times as hard down, and that really was a struggle for me. It still is.
I don't
For
have.
me, I'd say my struggle was like the fact that having to play the drums, you need to use all 4 of your limbs separately, which is a skill you have to develop by playing by practicing a lot. So at the beginning, I wasn't really able to make a separate beat with my feet and my hands at the same time. Like I could play with my 2 hands separately, but I couldn't use my feet and do something completely different. So I had to like work on. The more I practiced, I had to make it so like all my limbs would act independently, and I could concentrate on doing 4 different things at the same time. So I could use all 4 of my limbs to play it. So that's the only way to make like it sound like real. Otherwise, it just doesn't come out sounding very good. So that was the biggest challenge for me, was making like giving all 4 of my limbs independence to play whatever they need to.
None of the challenges that I had were physical, like Calvin Ritchie and Alex. But the main challenge again was trying to find like an adaptation of Back in Black through the piano, and it's just like the physical challenge of being able to recreate the lead singer of AC/DC's voice, like, and trying to make it not sound like garbage.
Yeah, because I think there's actually only like a handful of people that can actually do that right. It's very difficult. So.
Yep. And so I think that does it. We've basically covered all the topics that we wanted to talk about.